A nurse is hired to care for a billionaire in a vegetative state. She performed various tasks, including changing his diapers. Everyone laughed, but one day, his wife would do something that would surprise them all. Before you listen, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. The soft rhythmic sound of the heart monitor filled the spacious room of the Thompson mansion. The cream silk curtains filtered the afternoon sunlight, creating a serene, almost ethereal atmosphere. In the center of the room, a state-of-the-art hospital bed contrasted with the luxurious decor. There, motionless, lay William Thompson, the tech magnate who, 6 months ago, had the world at his feet. Emily Carter adjusted the collar of her white uniform and took a deep breath before entering the room. The 28-year-old nurse, freshly graduated and full of ideals, couldn't imagine that this moment would change her life forever. "Good afternoon, Mr. Thompson," she said softly, approaching the bed. There was no response, as expected. William's eyes remained closed, his once expressive and lively face now an impassive mask. Emily began her routine, checking vital signs and adjusting the IV. Her movements were precise but gentle. She spoke to William as if he could understand every word, describing the sunny day outside and the latest news from the world he had left behind. "You know, Mr. Thompson, I read about your innovations in artificial intelligence. It's incredible how you foresaw the impact of technology on medicine. Who knows, maybe one of your inventions could help you now." A faint noise at the door interrupted Emily's monologue. She turned to find Elizabeth Thompson, William's wife, standing in the doorway. Tall, elegant, and with an icy gaze, Elizabeth was the epitome of Chicago sophistication. "I see you've already started, nurse." Elizabeth left the sentence hanging, raising a perfectly arched eyebrow. "Emily, ma'am." "Emily Carter." "Yes, Emily. I hope you're aware of the importance and discretion required for this job." The coldness in Elizabeth's voice made Emily instinctively straighten up. "Certainly, Mrs. Thompson. I assure you, I'll do my very best to care for your husband." Elizabeth approached the bed, her heels echoing on the marble floor. She looked at William, and for a moment Emily thought she saw a flicker of emotion in her eyes. But as quickly as it appeared, it vanished. "Well, I'll leave him in your hands then. If you need anything, Mrs. Margaret, the housekeeper, will be available. I'll be in my office." With that, Elizabeth left, leaving behind a trail of expensive perfume and an almost palpable tension. Emily exhaled the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She turned her attention back to William, noticing for the first time the details of his face. Despite his comatose state, traces of the charismatic man he once was still lingered. The lines around his eyes suggested someone who smiled often, something hard to reconcile with the motionless figure before her. "Don't worry, Mr. Thompson," Emily whispered, adjusting his pillow. "I'm here to help you, and I'll do everything in my power." The following hours were filled with the routine of care. Emily checked every detail, from skin hydration to the correct positioning to prevent pressure ulcers. As she worked, she couldn't help but think about the strange dynamic she had witnessed. Elizabeth's coldness starkly contrasted with the public image of the couple, always portrayed as the perfect example of unity and success. At the end of the day, Emily made her final notes in the chart. She was about to leave when she noticed something unusual. A photo frame on the bedside table, almost hidden behind medical equipment. Curious, she picked it up. The photo showed William smiling, holding a Siamese cat. "You have a furry friend, Mr. Thompson," she murmured, placing the frame back gently. "Thompson," Emily smiled, placing the photo frame back in its place. "Maybe we can bring him for a visit someday?" At that moment, a thought began to form in Emily's mind. What if there was more to recovery than just medication and physical therapy? What if emotional stimuli could make a difference? With this idea taking root, Emily left the room, determined to research more about alternative therapies and sensory stimulation for patients in a vegetative state. Little did she know that her dedication and creativity were about to set off. A series of events that would change not only William's life, but also the lives of everyone around him. As she descended the stairs of the mansion, Emily crossed paths with Mrs. Margaret, the housekeeper. The middle-aged woman offered her a warm smile. A welcome contrast after the cold encounter with Elizabeth. "How was your first day, my dear?" asked Margaret, her northeastern accent filled with kindness. "It was interesting," replied Emily, choosing her words carefully. "There's a lot of work to be done." Margaret nodded, understanding. "Mr. William is a good man. He deserves all the care in the world. You know, before the accident, this house was full of life. Parties, gatherings, always people coming and going. Now..." She left the sentence hanging, her gaze lost in memories. Emily felt a pang of curiosity. "Mrs. Margaret, have you worked here for a long time?" "Oh yes, my dear. I've been with the Thompson family for over 20 years. I saw William build his empire from scratch. A visionary man, always ahead of his time." The nurse hesitated for a moment before asking, "And Mrs. Elizabeth? How is she handling all of this?" Margaret's face tightened slightly. Mrs. Elizabeth, well, everyone deals with grief in their own way, don't they? But don't be fooled by her coldness. Behind that facade, there's a woman in pain." Emily nodded, absorbing the information. She said goodbye to Margaret and left the mansion, her mind buzzing with ideas and questions. The contrast between the William from the stories, vibrant and full of life, and the motionless man in the hospital bed was shocking. As she walked to the bus stop, Emily made a silent promise to herself. She would do everything in her power to bring William back. In the days that followed, Emily immersed herself in her new routine. She arrived early at the Thompson mansion, always with a smile on her face and renewed energy. Her interactions with Elizabeth remained formal and distant, but she didn't let that shake her determination. A week after her first day, Emily decided to implement some of the ideas she had been researching. With Elizabeth's reluctant permission, she began introducing music into William's room. She started with soft classical compositions, filling the previously silent space with comforting melodies. "They say music can stimulate dormant areas of the brain, Mr. Thompson," Emily explained as she adjusted the volume. "Who knows, maybe it will awaken some memory in you." In addition to music, Emily introduced aromatherapy. Carefully selected essential oils were diffused in the room, creating a more welcoming and stimulating environment. She watched intently for any reaction, no matter how small. It was during one of these sessions that Emily noticed something. As a Mozart sonata played, William's fingers seemed to move slightly. It was an almost imperceptible movement, but she was sure of what she had seen. Excited, Emily recorded the occurrence in the medical chart. She knew she shouldn't get her hopes up, but she couldn't deny the flicker of optimism she felt. It was a start, no matter how small. As the days turned into weeks, Emily continued to refine her techniques. She introduced reading aloud, choosing everything from current news to excerpts from William's favorite books, information she discreetly obtained from Margaret. One afternoon, while reading an article about the latest advancements in artificial intelligence, a field in which William had been a pioneer, Emily noticed a subtle change in his heart rate. The monitor showed a slight acceleration, something that hadn't happened before. "Mr. Thompson, can you hear me?" she asked, leaning over the bed. There was no visible response, but Emily's heart raced at the possibility of progress. Encouraged by these small signs, Emily decided to take a bold step. She remembered the photo with the cat and asked Margaret about the animal. "Ah, Leo," Margaret sighed with a nostalgic smile. "He was Mr. William's darling. Unfortunately, since the accident, Mrs. Elizabeth thought it best to keep him away. She said it was too much excitement for him." Emily frowned, an idea forming in her mind. "Margaret, where is Leo now?" "With Mr. William's sister. She visits him from time to time, but she never brings the cat." Determined, Emily decided it was time for a serious conversation with Elizabeth. She found William's wife in her office, immersed in paperwork and with a tired expression she rarely let show. "Mrs. Thompson, may I speak with you for a moment?" Elizabeth looked up, her expression hardening instantly. "Yes, Emily, is there a problem with William?" "Actually, it's about an idea I had. I believe we could try something new to stimulate Mr. Thompson." Elizabeth leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "And what would that be?" Emily took a deep breath before continuing. "I'd like to suggest that we bring Leo in for a visit. The presence of a pet can have surprising therapeutic effects." For a moment, Elizabeth's face softened as if a distant memory had been stirred, but soon the mask of indifference returned. "I'm not sure that's a good idea, Emily. William is in a very delicate condition." "I understand your concern, Mrs. Thompson, but I can assure you that I will take all necessary precautions. Besides, we've been seeing small signs of progress with the new therapies. Leo might be just the emotional stimulus Mr. Thompson needs." Elizabeth was silent for a few moments, her eyes fixed on a distant point. Finally, she let out a resigned, "Aye. Very well, Emily, you can try, but I want to be present when you bring the cat." Emily could barely contain her excitement. "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. I promise you won't regret it." Leaving the office, Emily felt a wave of hope. Something told her this could be the key to waking William from his deep sleep. As she walked back to his room, her mind was already working on the details of the next step in her plan. The day dawned with a palpable sense of anticipation in the Thompson mansion. Emily arrived earlier than usual, her heart racing with the anticipation of what was to come. Today was the day Leo, William's Siamese cat, would return home after months of absence. As she prepared the room for the feline's arrival, Emily couldn't help but notice the subtle change in the atmosphere of the mansion. Even Mrs. Margaret seemed more lively, humming softly as she polished the furniture in the hallway. "It's as if the house is waking up from a long sleep, isn't it?" the housekeeper commented, a nostalgic gleam in her eyes. Emily nodded, sharing the sentiment. "I hope this brings a bit of life back, Mrs. Margaret, for all of us." The hours dragged on until finally the sound of an approaching car broke the afternoon stillness. Emily rushed to the window, seeing a sleek black sedan park at the entrance. From the passenger seat emerged a woman she immediately recognized as Sophia, William's sister, thanks to the photos she had seen around the house. Sophia was the picture of casual elegance, her wavy brown hair framing a face that closely resembled William's. In her arms, she cradled a pet carrier, from which soft meows emanated. Emily descended the stairs, finding Elizabeth already at the door, her stiff posture betraying a mix of anxiety and reluctance. "Sophia," Elizabeth greeted, her voice softer than Emily had ever heard. "Thank you for bringing Leo." The two women embraced briefly, a gesture that seemed more formal than affectionate. Sophia then turned to Emily, a warm smile lighting up her face. "You must be Emily. I've heard so much about you and your work with my brother. You don't know how grateful I am." Emily blushed slightly, surprised by the recognition. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Sophia. I'm just doing my best for Mr. Thompson. Please call me Sophia, and I'm sure your best is exceptional considering the progress Elizabeth has told me about." Emily shot a surprised glance at Elizabeth, who averted her eyes, seemingly uncomfortable with the indirect praise. "Well," Elizabeth interjected, "I think we should go upstairs. William is waiting." The group ascended the stairs, the sound of Leo's meows echoing through the house. As they entered the room, Emily immediately noticed a subtle change in William. Though his eyes remained closed, there was an almost imperceptible tension in his face, as if he were trying to hear something distant. Sophia placed the carrier on the floor and carefully opened the door. For a moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, a curious nose appeared, followed by a pair of piercing blue eyes. Leo emerged cautiously, his silky fur gleaming under the soft light of the room. The cat looked around, sniffing the air, until his eyes landed on the motionless figure in the bed. What happened next left everyone breathless. With a soft meow, Leo gracefully leaped onto the bed, approaching William. The feline gently touched the man's face with his paw, as if checking if it was really him. And then, to everyone's astonishment, William's hand moved. It was a slow, almost imperceptible movement, but undeniable. His fingers curled slightly, as if trying to reach the soft fur of the cat. Emily was the first to react, rushing to the side of the bed to check William's vital signs. His heart was beating faster, and there was increased brain activity on the monitor. "This is incredible," she whispered, barely containing her emotion. Elizabeth, who had been observing the scene with a mix of shock and disbelief, approached hesitantly. "William," she called, her voice trembling slightly. "Can you hear me?" There was no verbal response, but William's fingers moved again, this time more noticeably. Leo, seemingly satisfied with the reaction, settled beside his owner, purring softly. Sophia, with tears in her eyes, held her brother's hand. "We're here, Will, all of us," and Leo came back too. The room fell silent, except for the constant purring of the cat and the rhythmic beeping of the monitors. It was as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the next miracle. Emily, recovering from the initial shock, began conducting a series of quick tests. She checked William's pupils, his response to auditory and tactile stimuli. Though there were no drastic changes, there was definitely more reactivity than at any point since she had started caring for him. "This is significant progress," she explained, turning to Elizabeth and Sophia. "I don't want to create false hope, but this response is very encouraging. I suggest we keep Leo close, if possible, and monitor closely over the next few hours and days." Elizabeth, who usually maintained a facade of composure, seemed visibly shaken. Her gaze alternated between William and the cat, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. I don't know what to say," she murmured, her voice choked. Maybe we were too quick to send Leo away." Sophia placed a comforting hand on her sister-in-law's shoulder. "Don't blame yourself, Elizabeth. We were all doing what we thought was best at the time. What matters is that we have new hope now." Emily observed the interaction between the two women with interest. It was clear there was a complicated history. Their layers of shared emotions and experiences she was only beginning to glimpse. The following hours were filled with intense observation and care. Emily adjusted her procedures to accommodate Leo's presence, ensuring the cat didn't interfere with the medical equipment, but allowing him to stay close to William. As the afternoon turned into evening, Elizabeth and Sophia took turns by the bedside, speaking softly to William, sharing memories and words of encouragement. Emily noticed that for the first time since she had started working there, Elizabeth showed genuine vulnerability, her eyes often welling up as she watched her husband. Around midnight, when exhaustion began to weigh on everyone, something extraordinary happened. William, who had until then shown only subtle movements, opened his eyes. It was a brief moment, his eyes opening for just a few seconds before closing again, but it was enough to send a wave of shock through the room. "He woke up!" exclaimed Sophia, squeezing her brother's hand. "William, can you hear us?" Elizabeth, who had been dozing in a nearby chair, jumped up. What happened?" Emily was already by the bed, conducting a quick series of checks. "His eyes opened for a moment," she explained, trying to maintain professional calm despite her own excitement. "It's a very positive sign, but we need to be cautious. It may take time before there's full awareness." The following hours were an emotional roller coaster. William opened his eyes a few more times, each episode lasting a little longer than the last. Though there was still no verbal response or clear recognition, it was evident that something fundamental had shifted in his condition. Leo remained a constant presence, sometimes dozing beside William, other times watching intently every movement in the room. It was as if the cat understood the importance of the moment, keeping a silent vigil over his owner. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Emily finally convinced Elizabeth and Sophia to get some rest. "I'll stay with him," she assured them. "Any changes, I'll call you immediately." Reluctantly, the two women agreed to take turns resting, with Sophia going first to the guest room while Elizabeth stayed nearby. Alone with William and Leo, Emily allowed herself a moment of reflection. In just 24 hours, the scenario had changed drastically. Where there had once been only silence and stillness, now pulsed an energy of possibilities. "Mr. Thompson," she whispered, leaning over the bed. "I don't know if you can hear me, but I want you to know that we're all here for you. Don't give up, keep fighting." As if responding to her words, William's fingers moved slightly, brushing against Leo's fur. The cat responded with a soft purr, creating a symphony of hope in the once silent room. Emily smiled, feeling a mix of exhaustion and euphoria. She knew the road ahead would be long and challenging, but for the first time since she had started caring for William, she felt they were truly making progress. As the new day unfolded, bringing with it promises of change and challenges, Emily couldn't help but think about how the arrival of a simple cat, had triggered a series of events that could alter the course of many lives. In the weeks following Leo's return, the Thompson mansion underwent a palpable transformation. What had once been an environment of heavy silence now pulsed with a renewed energy of hope and anticipation. Emily, more dedicated than ever, adjusted her routine to incorporate Leo's constant presence in William's care. The Siamese cat, in turn, seemed to have taken on the role of a faithful guardian, rarely straying from his owner's side. The progress, though slow, was undeniable. William began to have longer periods of consciousness, his eyes opening more frequently and staying open longer. There was still no verbal communication, but Emily noticed small reactions to stimuli. A raised eyebrow in response to a question, a slight squeeze of the hand when someone held his. Elizabeth, who had initially maintained a cautious distance, now spent hours by her husband's bedside. Emily watched her with curiosity, noting the subtle changes in her behavior. The coldness that had once characterized William's wife was gradually giving way to a vulnerability she seemed to struggle to hide. On a particularly sunny afternoon, Emily entered the room to find Elizabeth reading aloud to William. It was an article about the latest advances in artificial intelligence, a field in which William had been a pioneer before the accident. And experts believe this new approach could revolutionize the field of personalized medicine. Elizabeth concluded, her voice soft but firm. She looked up, meeting Emily's gaze. He always got so excited about these breakthroughs. He would stay up all night working on his ideas. Emily approached, checking the monitors as she responded. It must have been fascinating to be so close to his work. Elizabeth let out a sigh, her gaze lost in memories. At first, yes, but over time, well, let's just say it wasn't always easy competing with his work for his attention. The nurse felt she was glimpsing a side of the couple's relationship that had remained hidden until now. Mrs. Thompson, if I may ask, how did you two meet? For a moment, Emily feared she had crossed some invisible boundary, but to her surprise, Elizabeth smiled faintly. It was at a technology conference in San Francisco. I was there representing my father's company, and William was one of the speakers. He was so brilliant, so full of ideas and energy. It was impossible not to be fascinated. Elizabeth paused, her fingers absently stroking William's hand. We got married 6 months later. It was a whirlwind, you know. Everything happened so fast. Suddenly I was at the center of this world of innovation and big business. Emily listened intently, sensing the melancholy tone in Elizabeth's voice. And how was it adapting to that new life? Challenging, Elizabeth admitted, her mask of composure slipping momentarily. William was always working, always focused on his next big project. Sometimes I felt more like a business partner than a wife. At that moment, something unexpected happened. William's fingers moved, lightly squeezing Elizabeth's hand. Both women looked at him in surprise. "William?" Elizabeth called, leaning closer. "Can you hear us?" William's eyes slowly opened, focusing on Elizabeth's face with a clarity they hadn't shown before. His lips moved as if trying to speak, but no sound came out. Emily quickly stepped forward, performing a series of quick tests. "Mr. Thompson, if you can understand me, blink twice." There was a tense moment as they waited. Then, slowly but deliberately, William blinked twice. The room was filled with a wave of emotion. Elizabeth covered her mouth with her hands, tears silently streaming down her face. Emily felt her heart race with excitement and shock. "This is incredible," she whispered, more to herself than to the others. "Mr. Thompson, do you know where you are?" William blinked twice again. "My God," Elizabeth exclaimed, her voice choked. "He's really conscious. William, my love, can you speak?" William opened his mouth, making a visible effort, but only a hoarse, inarticulate sound came out. Frustration crossed his face. "It's okay," Emily intervened gently. "Don't force it. It takes time to regain all functions. The important thing is that you're communicating with us." Elizabeth held her husband's hand tighter, her eyes fixed on his. "We're here with you, William. We're not going anywhere." The next few minutes were a whirlwind of activity. Emily conducted a series of additional tests, checking reflexes and responses to various stimuli. Meanwhile, Elizabeth alternated between speaking softly to William and making frantic calls to Sophia and the doctors. Amid all the commotion, Leo, who had been sleeping at the foot of the bed, woke up and carefully approached William. The cat gently touched his owner's face with his paw, as if checking his condition. To everyone's surprise, William managed to raise his hand a few inches, his fingers brushing against Leo's soft fur. A soft sound, almost a sob, escaped his lips. "He recognizes Leo," Emily said, amazed. "This is an excellent sign. It shows that his long-term memories are intact." Elizabeth, watching the scene, seemed torn between joy and a more complex emotion that Emily couldn't decipher. "He always had a special connection with that cat," she murmured, almost to herself. The following hours were a mix of intensive medical exams and emotional moments. Sophia arrived, openly crying upon seeing her brother conscious. The medical team, led by neurologist Dr. Anderson, conducted a battery of tests, all confirming what they already knew. William was waking from his long sleep. "This is remarkable progress," Dr. Anderson explained after completing the exams. "But it's important to understand that we're just at the beginning of a long recovery process. There will be significant challenges ahead." Elizabeth, who seemed to have regained some of her usual composure, nodded seriously. "What can we expect, Doctor?" "Well, speech will likely be one of the biggest initial hurdles. We'll also have to work intensively on regaining mobility. There is a possibility of cognitive deficits, although it is too early to determine the extent." Emily, listening attentively, was already beginning to formulate plans in her mind. She knew her role would be crucial in the coming months, perhaps years. "And what about the therapy with the cat?" she asked, pointing to Leo, who had returned to his post at the foot of the bed. "Clearly it's having a positive impact." Dr. Anderson smiled, a glimmer of interest in his eyes. "I completely agree. Animal-assisted therapy has shown promising results in cases like this. I suggest we continue and even intensify this approach." As the discussion about the next steps in treatment continued, Emily noticed that William had fallen asleep, his face more relaxed than she had ever seen it. Elizabeth, noticing the same, quietly approached the bed, adjusting the blankets with a care that contrasted with her usual reserve. At that moment, observing the scene, Emily felt the weight of the responsibility she carried. William's awakening was just the beginning. The road ahead would be long and full of challenges, not just for him but for everyone around him. But there was hope, a hope that just a few weeks ago had seemed impossible. And with that hope came Emily's determination to do everything in her power to help William recover not only his health but his life. As the sun set, casting golden shadows across the room, Emily made a silent promise. No matter how difficult it got, she would be there, guiding William and his family through this journey of recovery, one step at a time. What none of them knew was that this awakening would not only change William's life, but would also set off a series of events that would deeply transform everyone in that room, revealing long-buried truths and forging connections no one could have foreseen. The weeks following William's awakening were intense and challenging. The Thompson mansion, once a place of silence and contained expectation, now buzzed with renewed energy. A multidisciplinary team of healthcare professionals came and went, turning the main bedroom into a sort of makeshift rehabilitation center. Emily, more dedicated than ever, coordinated the efforts with a mix of professional determination and personal care that did not go unnoticed by the others. Her routine now included not only basic care, but also overseeing physical therapy, speech therapy, and occupational therapy sessions. William, for his part, faced each day with a resilience that surprised everyone. His progress, though slow, was steady. His speech, initially limited to inarticulate sounds, began to take shape in hesitant words. His movements, once almost non-existent, gradually gained strength and precision. On a particularly challenging afternoon, during a physical therapy session, William struggled to move his right leg as instructed by the therapist. The effort was visible on his face, beads of sweat rolling down his forehead. "Come on, Mr. Thompson," Emily encouraged, standing by the bed. "I know it's hard, but you can do it." William closed his eyes, concentrating intensely. Then, with a grunt of effort, his leg moved a few inches. "Excellent," exclaimed the physical therapist, Dr. Paul. "That's a big step forward." At that moment, Elizabeth entered the room carrying a tray of tea. Her eyes widened as she saw the movement. He moved his leg?" she asked, her voice barely disguising her emotion. Emily nodded, smiling. "Yes, and it was the most controlled movement so far." Elizabeth approached the bed, setting the tray aside. For the first time since Emily had known her, she saw tears in the usually composed Mrs. Thompson's eyes. "William," she said softly, holding her husband's hand, "you're doing so well." William turned his head toward Elizabeth's voice, his eyes focusing on her face. Then, to everyone's surprise, he spoke. It was just one word, his voice hoarse and low, but clear. "Elizabeth." The room fell silent for a moment, everyone processing what had just happened. Elizabeth brought her hand to her mouth, unable to hold back a sob. "Yes, my love," she replied, squeezing his hand. "I'm here." Emily and Dr. Oliver exchanged excited glances. This was a significant milestone in William's recovery. In the days that followed, William's speech gradually improved. Words gave way to short, though still hesitant, sentences. With each new achievement, Emily noticed a subtle change in Elizabeth. The cold, distant facade that had characterized her at the beginning was slowly unraveling, revealing a complex woman deeply invested in her husband's recovery. One evening, as Emily was finishing her notes before ending her shift, Elizabeth approached her in the hallway. "Emily," she began, her voice low and hesitant, I want to thank you for everything you've done." Surprised by the unusual display of gratitude, Emily smiled. "There's no need to thank me, Mrs. Thompson. I'm just doing my job." Elizabeth shook her head. "So no, it's more than that. You've brought hope back to this house, to William, to me." There was a pause, heavy with unspoken emotion. Emily felt she was seeing a side of Elizabeth that few had the privilege of knowing. "You know," Elizabeth continued, her gaze lost in some distant point, "when William had the accident, a part of me froze. It was easier to keep my distance, to pretend nothing had changed. But seeing him like this now, fighting to come back, makes me realize how wrong I was to pull away." Emily listened intently, feeling the weight of Elizabeth's words. "It's never too late to rebuild, Mrs. Thompson. Mr. William needs you now, more than ever." Elizabeth nodded, unshed tears glistening in her eyes. "Thank you, Emily, for not giving up on him, and for helping me not to give up either." With that, Elizabeth turned and walked back to William's room, leaving Emily deep in thought. The young nurse realized she was witnessing not just William's physical recovery, but also a profound emotional transformation in everyone around him. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. William's progress, though steady, was punctuated by moments of frustration and occasional setbacks. There were days when he struggled to form words that had flowed easily the day before, or when his muscles seemed to refuse to cooperate. It was during one of these difficult moments that Emily witnessed something that would forever change her understanding of the Thompson family dynamics. William was having a particularly challenging day. After an exhausting speech therapy session, he seemed to be at the end of his patience. Frustrated by his inability to clearly express his thoughts, he suddenly burst into tears of anger and despair. Elizabeth, who was present, was visibly shaken by her husband's emotional outburst. For a moment, she seemed to freeze, unsure of how to react. Then, to Emily's surprise, Elizabeth sat on the edge of the bed and pulled William into a tight embrace. "It's okay, my love," she whispered, her voice choked. "You don't have to be strong all the time. We're in this together, remember?" William, still sobbing, clung to her as if his life depended on it. It was a moment of pure, raw vulnerability, something Emily suspected was rare for both of them. I'm so sorry," William managed to say between sobs. "For everything. For work, for the distance, and for not being the husband you deserved." Elizabeth stepped back slightly, holding William's face in her hands. "No, William. I'm also to blame. I could have fought harder for us, could have made more of an effort to understand your world, but now we have a second chance, and I promise I won't waste it." Emily, feeling almost like an intruder in this intimate moment, quietly slipped out of the room, Her heart was heavy with the realization of how deeply William's accident had affected not only his physical health, but the very fabric of his relationship with Elizabeth. That night, as she finished her notes, Emily reflected on everything she had witnessed. William's recovery journey was turning out to be much more than just a physical battle. It was an opportunity for healing on all levels: body, mind, and relationships. What the future held for the Thompsons was still uncertain. The road ahead would be long and undoubtedly filled with more challenges. But Emily felt a wave of optimism. She had seen the power of love and dedication overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. As she closed her notebook, Emily made a silent promise to herself. She would continue to be not just a caregiver for William, but a support for the entire Thompson family on this journey of rediscovery and reconnection. What she didn't know was that her own role in this story was about to become far more complex than she had ever imagined. The weeks ahead would bring revelations and challenges that would test not only her professional skills, but also her emotional limits. Autumn arrived at the Thompson mansion, painting the gardens in golden and reddish hues. With the change of seasons came a new phase in William's recovery and the family's dynamics. Emily, now a constant and trusted presence in the house, began to notice subtle changes in everyone's behavior. William, whose physical progress was evident, seemed to be struggling with something beyond his physical recovery. There were moments when his gaze would drift into emptiness, a shadow of worry crossing his face. One afternoon, as she helped William with his physical therapy exercises in the garden, Emily decided to bring it up. "Mr. Thompson," she began gently, "I've noticed that something seems to be troubling you. Would you like to talk about it?" William hesitated, his eyes fixed on a distant point. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and heavy with emotion. "Emily, there are things from my past, decisions I made. I fear that as I regain my life, I might lose everything again." Intrigued and concerned, Emily sat beside him on the garden bench. "What do you mean, Mr. Thompson? What could be so serious?" William sighed deeply, closing his eyes for a moment. "Before the accident, I was about to make a revelation that would change everything. Something about my company, about me. And now with Elizabeth and I reconnecting, I fear the truth might destroy everything again." Emily felt the weight of William's words. It was clear he was carrying a heavy burden, something that went beyond his physical condition. "Mr. Thompson," she said softly, "I can't imagine what you're going through, but I believe honesty is always the best path. Mrs. Thompson has shown incredible love and dedication during your recovery. Perhaps she's more prepared to hear the truth than you think." William nodded slowly, a mix of fear and determination in his eyes. "You're right, Emily. I need to tell her, but I need time to find the right words." In the days that followed, Emily watched William with heightened attention. She noticed the whispered conversations between him and Sophia, his sister, which seemed to abruptly stop whenever someone approached. The tension in the air was palpable, like the calm before a storm. Elizabeth, for her part, seemed to have noticed the change in her husband's behavior. Her glances at William were a mix of love and concern, as if she sensed something important was about to happen. One night, while Emily was making her nightly rounds, she heard voices coming from William's office. Normally, she would have moved on, respecting the family's privacy, but something about the urgency in the whispers made her stop. "William, are you sure about this?" It was Sophia's voice, tense and worried. Revealing this now could put everything at risk. "I have no choice, Sophia," William replied, his voice firmer than Emily had heard in months. "I can't build a new beginning on lies and secrets." There was a pause, and then Sophia spoke again, her voice softer. "What about the company? The jobs of thousands of people?" "That's why we need to act now," William said. "There's still time to fix things, to do what's right. But Elizabeth needs to know first. She deserves to know the truth before everything comes out." Emily quietly stepped away, her mind spinning with possibilities. What could be so serious that it threatened not only William and Elizabeth's relationship, but also their company? The following days were tense. Emily could feel that something important was about to happen, but she kept discreetly to the side, focused on her professional duties. It was on a Thursday night that everything came to a head. Emily was finishing her shift when she heard a scream coming from the master bedroom. Rushing there, she found a scene she would never forget. Elizabeth was standing, pale as a ghost, holding a set of papers. William was sitting on the bed, his face a mask of anguish and regret. "How could you?" Elizabeth shouted, her voice trembling with anger and pain. "All this time, our entire life together. Was it all based on a lie?" William tried to stand, reaching out to her. "Elizabeth, please let me explain. I never meant to." But Elizabeth recoiled as if his touch might burn her. "Don't you dare come near me. You've ruined everything. Our life, our reputation, the future of thousands of people." It was at this moment that Elizabeth noticed Emily standing in the doorway. For a moment, their eyes met, and Emily saw in them a mix of pain, betrayal, and a silent plea for help. "Emily," Elizabeth said, her voice almost a whisper, "please help me pack my things. I can't stay here another minute." Caught off guard, Emily hesitated. Her professional instinct told her to remain neutral, but her heart broke at the evident suffering of both. "Mrs. Thompson," she began cautiously, "perhaps it would be better—" But Elizabeth interrupted her, her voice now firm. "No, Emily. There's nothing more to say. Not now." With one last look of disdain at William, Elizabeth left the room, leaving behind a deafening silence. Emily found herself torn between following Elizabeth and staying with William, who seemed on the verge of a breakdown. Choosing professional duty, she approached William to check his vitals. "Mr. Thompson," she said softly, "are you okay? Do you need anything?" William looked at her, his eyes filled with tears. "I've ruined everything, Emily. Everything I built, everything I loved. It's over." At that moment, Emily realized she was at the center of a storm that went far beyond her role as a nurse. William's secrets, whatever they were, had the power to shake not only his family, but potentially the business world and the lives of countless people. As night fell over the Thompson mansion, Emily knew the coming days would be crucial. She would have to navigate carefully between her professional duty and the emotional involvement she had inevitably developed with the family. What she didn't know was that her own role in this story was about to become much more complex. William's revelations would trigger a series of events that would test not only her professional ethics, but also her own moral convictions. As the scandal unfolded, Emily found herself at the epicenter of a storm that threatened to engulf not only the Thompsons, but everyone around them. And amid it all, she would have to make choices that would define not only the family's future, but also her own. The days following William's explosive revelation were a whirlwind of emotions and chaos at the Thompson mansion. Elizabeth, true to her word, had left that same night, taking only a small suitcase and leaving behind a void of uncertainty and pain. Emily, now more than ever, found herself torn between her professional duty and the emotional involvement she had inevitably developed with the family. William, devastated by Elizabeth's departure and the weight of his own secrets, seemed to have regressed in his recovery. On a particularly tense morning, Emily entered William's room to find him sitting on the bed staring out the window. His eyes, once full of determination, now seemed empty and distant. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson," she said softly, approaching to check his vitals. "How are you feeling today?" William turned slowly to her, a sad smile playing on his lips. "Like a man who destroyed everything he loved, Emily. Like someone who doesn't deserve a second chance." Emily's heart tightened at his words. She sat on the edge of the bed, deciding that at that moment, what William needed most was a friendly ear. "Mr. Thompson," she began hesitantly, "I know it's not my place to ask, but what exactly happened? What could be so grave as to cause all this?" William sighed deeply, closing his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, there was a resolve in his gaze. "You deserve to know, Emily. After everything you've done for me, for this family, you deserve the truth." He paused, as if gathering courage, and then began his confession. "A few years ago, when my company was on the verge of a revolutionary breakthrough in artificial intelligence, I did something unforgivable. I falsified crucial research results." Emily felt her stomach sink. The implications of what William was revealing were enormous. "At first," he continued, his voice trembling slightly. It was just a small adjustment to the data, something to attract more investors to buy us more time. But one lie led to another, and before I knew it, the entire foundation of my company, the empire I built, was based on fraud. Tears began to stream down William's face as he went on. The worst part is that I convinced myself I was doing it for the greater good, that eventually, with enough time and resources, we could turn the lie into reality. But the truth is, I was just protecting my ego, my reputation. Emily listened in silence, struggling to process the magnitude of what she was hearing. Part of her wanted to comfort William, to tell him everything would be okay. But another part was horrified by the ethical and legal implications of his actions. "And Elizabeth?" she dared to ask. "Did she know nothing about this?" William shook his head sadly. "No, I kept Elizabeth completely in the dark. I thought I was protecting her, but in truth I was just being a coward. She dedicated her life to me, to our company, believing in a lie." A heavy silence fell over the room. Emily tried to reconcile the broken man before her with the tech magnate everyone admired. It was a painful lesson in how appearances could be deceiving. "Mr. Thompson," she finally spoke, carefully choosing her words, "what do you intend to do now?" William raised his gaze, a renewed determination shining in his eyes. "I'm going to tell the truth, Emily, to everyone, to the press, to the shareholders, to the authorities. I know I'll probably lose everything, my company, my freedom, maybe even Elizabeth forever, but it's the only way to start fixing what I've done." Emily nodded slowly, respecting William's courage despite the gravity of his past actions. "And when do you plan to do this?" "Today," he replied, surprising her. "I've already asked Sophia to arrange a press conference for this afternoon. It's time to face the consequences of my actions." The hours that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Sophia arrived, her eyes red and swollen from crying, but her posture resolute as she stood by her brother. Lawyers and PR advisors came and went from the room, all trying to prepare William for what was to come. Emily watched it, all with a mix of admiration and apprehension. Part of her wanted to protect William, to shield him from the storm that would surely follow, but she knew this was a path he needed to walk. When the time for the press conference arrived, Emily helped William dress properly for the first time in months. As she adjusted his tie, their eyes met in the mirror. "Thank you, Emily," William said softly, "for everything. I know what I'm about to do today will probably cost me everything, but I feel like I'm finally doing the right thing." Emily smiled gently, squeezing his shoulder in a gesture of support. "I'm proud of you, Mr. Thompson. This takes a lot of courage." As William was led to the living room, where dozens of journalists were waiting, Emily retreated to the back of the house. She didn't want to intrude on this pivotal moment for the family. From a distance, she heard William's voice, steady, despite everything, beginning his public confession. The reactions of the journalists, gasps of shock, frantic questions, echoed through the mansion. Sitting in the kitchen with Mrs. Margaret quietly by her side, Emily reflected on the events of the past few weeks. How had a simple mission to care for a patient turned into something so complex and emotionally charged? The sound of a door slamming snapped her out of her thoughts. Hurried footsteps echoed down the hallway, and suddenly Elizabeth burst into the kitchen, her eyes wild and filled with tears. "Where is he?" she demanded, her voice trembling with emotion. "Where's William?" Emily stood up quickly, startled by her sudden appearance. "Mrs. Thompson, he's in the living room. There's a press conference." But Elizabeth was already moving, running toward William's voice. Emily followed her, her heart racing with anticipation of what was to come. As they reached the entrance to the living room, the scene unfolding was surreal. William, standing before a crowd of journalists, was in the middle of his confession. His words, heavy with regret and determination, filled the air. "And for that, I am here today to take full responsibility for my actions. I know I've disappointed not only my family and employees, but also everyone who believed in my vision. I am prepared to face the legal consequences." And it was at this moment that he saw Elizabeth. His words died in his throat, his eyes widening in a mix of surprise and fear. Elizabeth, for her part, seemed frozen in place, her eyes locked on William. The silence that fell over the room was deafening, broken only by the frantic clicking of photographers' cameras. Emily watched, holding her breath, as the couple stared at each other across the crowded room. In that moment, she realized she was witnessing a turning point, not just in the Thompsons' lives, but potentially in the history of technology and business. What would happen next? Would Elizabeth forgive William? How would the world react to this bombshell revelation? And what role would Emily play amidst all this chaos? The silence that followed Elizabeth's dramatic entrance at the press conference seemed to stretch indefinitely. The camera flashes froze the moment in time. William, pale and visibly shaken, staring at Elizabeth, whose face was a mask of conflicting emotions. It was Elizabeth who finally broke the silence. With firm steps, she crossed the crowded room, ignoring the whispers and stares of the journalists. When she reached William, she did something no one expected. She hugged him. "You idiot," she murmured, loud enough for the microphones to catch. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" William, surprised and emotional, returned the hug tightly. I was afraid," he admitted, his voice choked. "Afraid of losing you, of losing everything." Elizabeth pulled back slightly, holding William's face in her hands. "We built this together, William. We should have faced this together too." The intimate moment was interrupted by the growing buzz of the journalists, all eager for answers. Sophia, sensing the need to control the situation, quickly approached the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice steady despite the evident emotion. "Out of respect for Mr. Thompson's health and the gravity of the situation, we ask for your patience. We will return shortly to answer your questions." With that, she guided William and Elizabeth out of the room, while Emily and the security team kept the journalists at bay. In the days that followed, the Thompson mansion became the epicenter of a media storm. William's revelations shook the corporate and tech world. Stocks plummeted, business partners distanced themselves, and a federal investigation was immediately launched. Emily, amidst all the chaos, found herself in a unique position. Not only was she still responsible for William's health, but she also became a kind of emotional anchor for the family. Elizabeth, in particular, seemed to seek her company and advice with increasing frequency. One afternoon, while William rested after her grueling series of testimonies to the authorities, Elizabeth invited Emily for tea in the garden. Autumn was at its peak, and the golden leaves danced in the wind, creating a surprisingly serene scene, in contrast to the turmoil of the past weeks. "Emily," Elizabeth began, her voice tired but determined, "I want you to know how much we appreciate everything you've done, not just for William, but for all of us." Emily smiled gently, stirring her cup of tea. "It's my job, Mrs. Thompson. I'm here to help." Elizabeth shook her head. "No, it's more than that, and you know it. You've become part of this family, Emily, and that's why I need your advice." Surprised, Emily straightened in her chair. "My advice?" "Yes," Elizabeth sighed, looking at the horizon. "William and we're considering selling the company, using the money to reimburse investors, pay fines, fund legitimate research that might somehow compensate for the damage done. But I'm afraid of what this will mean for the employees, for the legacy we've built." Emily pondered for a moment, carefully weighing her words. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm no business expert, but I believe that sometimes, to rebuild, you must first completely dismantle. Perhaps this is the opportunity to start over, to build something new and truly ethical from the ground up." Elizabeth nodded slowly, a glimmer of determination appearing in her eyes. "You're right, Emily. We can't cling to the past. It's time to look to the future." In the weeks that followed, the Thompson family embarked on a journey of transformation. The sale of the company was announced, sending shockwaves through the market. William and Elizabeth, together, faced hearings, negotiations, and the relentless press. To the surprise of many, including Emily, the couple emerged from this ordeal stronger and more united than ever. Adversity, instead of driving them apart, seemed to have reconnected them in a profound and meaningful way. One day, while helping William with his physical therapy exercises, Emily couldn't help but notice a change in him. There was a lightness in his movements, a sparkle in his eyes that she hadn't seen in a long time. "You know, Emily," he said, pausing to catch his breath, "for years I lived in fear of being exposed, fear of losing everything. But now that I've lost almost everything, I feel free." Emily smiled, helping him sit up. "It's interesting how sometimes we need to lose something to gain something even greater, isn't it?" William nodded thoughtfully. "Exactly. I lost my company, my reputation, and I'll probably face legal consequences, but I've regained my integrity, my marriage, and a chance to truly make a difference." It was at this moment that Elizabeth entered the room carrying a stack of papers. Her face lit up when she saw William and Emily. "I have news," she announced, a genuine smile on her lips. "The sale of the company has been finalized, and guess what? The new leadership has agreed to keep most of the employees and continue with the legitimate research we were developing." William let out a sigh of relief. "That's wonderful, Elizabeth. At least they won't suffer because of my actions." Elizabeth sat down beside him, taking his hand. "It's not just your actions, William. We're a team, remember? In good times and bad." Emily watched the scene with a mix of joy and a tinge of sadness. Joy at seeing the couple reunited and facing challenges together. Sadness because she knew her time with the Thompsons was coming to an end. As if reading her thoughts, Elizabeth turned to her. "Emily, there's something else we want to discuss with you." William nodded, a mysterious smile on his face. "Yes, we have a proposal for you, one that we hope could be the start of a new chapter for all of us." Emily felt her heart race. What could the Thompsons have in mind? As she waited for them to elaborate, she couldn't help but reflect on how her life had changed since she first walked into that mansion. Whatever the future held, Emily knew that nothing would be the same as before. And in some way that filled her with an exciting sense of anticipation. Emily looked at William and Elizabeth with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. The couple exchanged a knowing glance before Elizabeth began to speak. "Emily," she said, her voice soft but firm, "throughout all this time you've been much more than just William's nurse. You've become a friend, a confidant, and in many ways part of our family." William nodded in agreement. "You didn't just take care of my physical health, but you also helped us navigate one of the most turbulent periods of our lives. And for that, we are eternally grateful." Emily felt a lump form in her throat. I just did my job," she managed to say, though she knew it was much more than that. Elizabeth smiled gently. "No, Emily. You did far more than your job required, and that's why we have a proposal for you." William adjusted himself in his chair, leaning slightly forward. "As you know, we sold the company. But what you don't know is that we set aside a significant portion of the resources for a new project. A project that we hope can make a real difference in the world." Emily looked from one to the other, intrigued. "What kind of project?" Elizabeth picked up an envelope from the stack of papers she had brought and handed it to Emily. "We're creating a foundation. An organization dedicated to helping people in situations similar to what William faced, patients recovering from severe neurological injuries, especially those without access to cutting-edge treatments." Emily opened the envelope with trembling hands, her eyes quickly scanning the documents inside. It was a detailed prospectus outlining the goals and structure of the new foundation. "This is incredible," she murmured, genuinely impressed by the scope and ambition of the project. William smiled, a spark of enthusiasm in his eyes that Emily hadn't seen since before the scandal. "And we want you to be a part of it, Emily, not just as a nurse, but as one of the leaders of the project." Emily felt as if the air had been sucked out of the room. "Me? But why? I don't have experience managing foundations or—" Elizabeth gently interrupted her. "You have something far more valuable, Emily. Practical experience, genuine compassion, and a deep understanding of the needs of patients and their families. Plus, you've proven yourself capable of thinking outside the box and implementing innovative solutions." William agreed. "Your work with me, especially the introduction of alternative therapies like music and Leo's presence, showed that you understand recovery goes far beyond conventional medical treatment." Emily was silent for a moment, absorbing it all. It was an incredible opportunity, a chance to make a real difference in the lives of many people, but it also meant a drastic change in her own life. I don't know what to say. She finally managed to speak. It's a wonderful proposal, but also intimidating. It would be a huge responsibility. Elizabeth took Emily's hand, squeezing it gently. We understand it's a big decision. We don't expect an immediate answer. We want you to think about it, consider it carefully, William added, and know that regardless of your decision, you'll always have a special place in our lives. Your work here is complete, Emily. You helped me recover not just my health, but also my integrity and my marriage. Now it's time to think about your own future. Emily nodded, feeling a wave of conflicting emotions: gratitude for the opportunity, fear of the unknown, sadness at leaving behind the work and the people who had become so important to her. Can I have a few days to think about it? She asked. Of course, Elizabeth replied promptly. Take all the time you need. In the meantime, how about we start planning your transition? Regardless of your decision about the foundation, I think we all agree you deserve a break after everything you've been through with us. The following days were a whirlwind for Emily. While helping to train the new nurse who would take over William's care, she couldn't help but reflect on everything she had experienced over the past months. Walking through the mansion gardens one afternoon, Emily found herself mentally revisiting every crucial moment of her journey with the Thompsons. The first day, when she faced Elizabeth's initial disdain, the small victories in William's recovery, the tense moment of the secret's revelation, the emotional reconciliation of the couple. Sitting on a bench near the lake, she watched the ducks swimming peacefully, seemingly unaware of the dramatic changes that had occurred around them. Thinking about the proposal, a familiar voice pulled her from her reverie. It was Sophia approaching with 2 steaming cups of tea. Emily smiled, accepting the offered cup. Is it that obvious? Sophia sat beside her, letting out a soft sigh. You have that look, the same one William used to have when he was about to make an important decision. They sat in silence for a moment, sipping their tea and observing the autumn landscape. You know, Sophia finally said, when William had the accident, I thought our family would never be the same, and in a way it isn't. But thanks to you, Emily, we've found a new normal. A better one, I'd say. Emily felt her cheeks flush with the compliment. I just did what I thought was right. Sophia shook her head, a gentle smile on her lips. No, you did much more than that. You reminded us of the importance of honesty, compassion, and forgiveness. You brought William back not just physically, but emotionally. Emily reflected on those words, feeling the weight of the decision ahead. What if I can't do the same? For others, what if I disappoint everyone at the foundation? Sophia placed a comforting hand on Emily's shoulder. The fear of failure is natural, Emily. But think about everything you've already accomplished here. You've faced challenges many would have considered impossible. The foundation would just be the next step in your journey to make a difference. Sophia's words resonated deeply with Emily. She remembered all the times she had doubted herself since she began working with the Thompsons, and how each challenge overcome had strengthened her. At that moment, sitting by the lake with the autumn sun setting on the horizon, Emily felt a clarity she hadn't experienced in weeks. She knew what she needed to do. Standing up, she turned to Sophia with a determined smile. I think it's time for me to have a conversation with William and Elizabeth. Sophia nodded, a glimmer of approval in her eyes. Go ahead. They're waiting for you. As Emily walked back to the mansion, her heart raced with a mix of nervousness and excitement. She didn't know exactly what the future held, but she was ready to embrace the challenge. What she didn't know was that her decision would not only change her own life, but would also touch the lives of countless others in the years to come. The journey that had begun in a quiet room, caring for a man in a vegetative state, was about to transform into something far greater than she could have ever imagined. William's office, once a sanctuary of business and technological innovation, now emanated a different atmosphere. The walls, once adorned with industry awards and recognitions, now displayed photos of recovering patients and charts detailing the goals of the new foundation. It was a silent testament to the transformation not only of the space but of the priorities and values of its occupants. Emily took a deep breath before knocking on the slightly open door. Inside, William and Elizabeth were leaning over a table, full of papers, discussing animatedly. Upon seeing her, they both smiled, a mix of anticipation and affection in their eyes. "Emily," William greeted her, his voice stronger and more confident than she had heard since the beginning of his recovery. "Please come in, we were just talking about you." Elizabeth pulled out a chair, inviting Emily to join them. "I hope it's good things," Emily joked, trying to ease her own tension. "Always," Elizabeth replied with a warm smile. "Actually, we were discussing some details about the Foundation's project, but I imagine you came here for a specific reason?" Emily nodded, feeling the weight of the decision she was about to share. "Yes, I've thought a lot about your proposal, about joining the Foundation." William and Elizabeth exchanged a quick glance before turning their full attention to Emily. The silence in the office was palpable, charged with anticipation. "And so?" William asked softly, his voice betraying a hint of anxiety. Emily took another deep breath and then, with a growing smile, announced, "I accept. I want to be part of this project, to help make a difference in the lives of others, just as I've been able to do in yours." The reaction was immediate. Elizabeth let out a cry of joy, standing up to hug Emily. William, still limited in his movements, reached out to shake her hand, his eyes shining with emotion. "You don't know how happy this makes us, Emily," William said, his voice choked. "Your experience, your compassion, will be invaluable to the Foundation's success." Elizabeth, still with an arm around Emily, added, "And not just that. You'll bring a unique perspective, someone who's been on the front lines of care and knows exactly what patients and their families need." Emily felt a wave of emotion wash over her. It was a moment of fulfillment, of feeling like she was on the right path. "Thank you for your trust," she said. "I promise to give my best to honor this opportunity." The three spent the next few hours discussing the initial details of the project. Emily was impressed by the comprehensive vision William and Elizabeth had developed. The Foundation wouldn't just provide medical treatment, but also psychological support, financial assistance for families in need, and investment in innovative research in neurological rehabilitation. "We want to create a holistic model of care," William explained, pointing to a diagram on the wall. "Something that treats not just the patient, but the entire ecosystem around them. Family, community, research, all interconnected." Emily nodded, already imagining the possibilities. "What about animal-assisted therapy? After what we saw with Leo, I think we could expand on that." Elizabeth smiled, clearly approving of the suggestion. "Excellent idea, Emily. In fact, we were already thinking about establishing partnerships with animal-assisted therapy organizations. Your experience in that area will be crucial." As the night progressed, the outlines of the future began to take shape more clearly. Emily felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. It was a new chapter in her life, a leap into the unknown, but one that promised growth and fulfillment. When they finally decided to wrap up the meeting, it was past midnight. William, visibly tired but with a gleam of satisfaction in his eyes, stood up with Elizabeth's help. "Well, I think it's time to rest," he said. "We have a long road ahead, but with this team, I feel like we can achieve something truly special." Elizabeth agreed, adding, "And Emily, don't worry about the practical details of the transition. We'll take care of everything. Your new contract, accommodations if you need to move, everything necessary so you can focus entirely on this new challenge." Emily felt a wave of gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you for this opportunity." William smiled, placing a hand on her shoulder. "No need for thanks. You've already done more for us than we could ever repay. This is just the beginning of a new journey together." As she walked back to her room that night, Emily reflected on the path that had brought her here. From a young, newly graduated nurse to a key player in a project that could change countless lives. It was a huge responsibility, but one she felt ready to take on. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, Emily allowed herself to dream about the future. She envisioned patients regaining movements they thought were lost forever, families reunited, groundbreaking research being conducted. And at the center of it all, she saw herself, no longer just observing and caring, but actively shaping the destinies of so many. With a smile on her lips, Emily drifted off to sleep. Her last thought before falling asleep a mix of gratitude for the past and anticipation for the future. Tomorrow would undoubtedly bring challenges, but also promises of a new beginning full of possibilities. What she didn't know was that the coming years would bring not only professional successes, but also personal challenges and surprising revelations that would test her resolve and redefine her understanding of family, loyalty, and purpose. But for now, on that quiet night, Emily rested, ready to embrace whatever fate had in store for her. The months following Emily's decision to join the Thompson Foundation were a whirlwind of activity. The mansion, once a symbol of wealth and corporate power, gradually transformed into the nerve center of a rapidly growing philanthropic organization. Emily threw herself headfirst into her new responsibilities. Her days were now filled with planning meetings, visits to hospitals and rehabilitation centers, and endless hours of research to implement the best practices in neurological care. One sunny spring morning, nearly a year after the project began, Emily found herself in the mansion's garden, now transformed into a therapeutic space for recovering patients. She watched with a smile as a group of therapists led an adapted yoga session for people with limited mobility. Impressive, isn't it? William's voice surprised her. He approached, walking with the aid of a cane, his physical progress evident in every steady step. Emily nodded, feeling a wave of pride. It's amazing to see how far we've come in such a short time. Who would have thought this garden would become a center for healing? William smiled, his eyes shining with a mix of satisfaction and determination. And this is just the beginning, Emily. We have big plans for the future. They walked together through the garden, discussing the foundation's latest developments. Emily couldn't help but notice how William had changed. The broken, guilt-ridden man she had met over a year ago had transformed into a compassionate and visionary leader. "You know," William said, stopping to watch a group of patients practicing Tai Chi, "sometimes I wonder if any of this would have been possible without you, Emily." Emily felt her cheeks flush at the unexpected compliment. "Oh, Mr. Thompson, it was you and Mrs. Elizabeth who had the vision to create all of this." William shook his head, his gaze growing more serious. "Maybe we had the idea, but you showed us the way. Your dedication, your innovative approach, you inspired us to think beyond the conventional." Before Emily could respond, they were interrupted by the hurried arrival of Elizabeth. Her usually composed face was tense with worry. "William, Emily," she called, approaching quickly. "We have a problem. The press." Elizabeth hesitated, casting a worried glance at the nearby patients before continuing in a low voice. "They're asking questions about the foundation's funding. Some journalists are suggesting we're using money obtained illegally." William's expression darkened instantly. "But that's absurd. All funds were audited and approved during the sale of the company." Emily felt a knot form in her stomach. After all the progress, after all the good they had done, were they now facing a new crisis? "What can we do?" she asked, her practical tone masking her growing anxiety. Elizabeth sighed, running a hand through her hair in a rare gesture of frustration. "For now, we need to be transparent. I suggest a press conference. Show all our financial records. Make it clear we have nothing to hide." William nodded slowly, his expression a mix of determination and weariness. "You're right, as always. Emily, we'll need your help to prepare the presentation. Your first-hand knowledge of the programs and your history with the foundation will be crucial." Emily felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. This wasn't just another professional challenge. It was a test of everything they had built together. The days that followed were a frantic race against time. Emily worked tirelessly alongside William and Elizabeth, preparing documents, rehearsing statements, and anticipating possible questions from the press. The nights dragged on until dawn, with the trio often falling asleep on piles of papers in the office. On the eve of the press conference, Emily found herself alone in the garden, seeking a moment of peace amidst the chaos. The moonlight bathed the flowers in a silvery light, creating an almost ethereal scene. "Can't sleep?" Sophia's soft voice pulled her from her thoughts. Emily turned, offering a tired smile. "I think I'm too nervous to sleep." Sophia joined her on the bench, offering a cup of hot tea. "It's understandable. You three have been carrying a huge burden these past few days. They sat in silence for a moment, sipping the tea and contemplating the night garden. You know, Sophia finally spoke, her voice filled with emotion. When William had the accident, I thought our family would never be the same. And in a way, it isn't. But thanks to you, Emily, we've found a new purpose, a new way of being a family. Emily felt tears forming in her eyes. I just did what I thought was right. Sophia took Emily's hand, squeezing it gently. You did much more than that. You showed us that it's possible to start over, that it's possible to turn tragedy into something beautiful and meaningful. Sophia's words deeply touched Emily. In that moment, under the starry sky, she felt a renewal of her determination. It didn't matter what the press or the outside world thought, the work they were doing was real. It was important, and it was worth fighting for. Thank you, Sophia, Emily said softly. I think I needed to hear that. With a final hand squeeze and an encouraging smile, Sophia said goodbye, leaving Emily alone with her thoughts. The young nurse, now a key figure in the Thompson Foundation, looked up at the sky, feeling a mix of gratitude for the journey so far and determination for the challenges yet to come. As she walked back to the house, Emily made a silent promise to herself and to all those the Foundation helped. No matter what happened at the press conference the next day, she would fight with all her strength to protect and expand the work they had started. What Emily didn't know was that the press conference would be just the beginning of a series of events that would test not only the integrity of the Foundation, but also the bonds she had formed with the Thompsons. The future held surprises, revelations, and challenges that no one could predict, but that would shape the destiny of everyone involved in profound and unexpected ways. The morning of the press conference dawned grey and rainy, as if the sky itself reflected the tension hanging over the Thompson mansion. Emily woke up early after a restless night of intermittent sleep. As she prepared, she mentally rehearsed answers to possible tough questions that might arise. The mansion's foyer, transformed into an improvised press room, buzzed with the nervous energy of journalists and photographers. Emily watched from a corner, feeling her heart race as the moment approached. William and Elizabeth entered, both projecting an image of confidence and composure that Emily knew was partly a facade. She could see the tension in William's shoulders, the slight tremor in Elizabeth's hands. "Good morning, everyone," William began, his voice steady despite the pressure. "We thank you for being here today. We are here to address the recent speculations about the funding of the Thompson Foundation and to reaffirm our commitment to transparency and integrity." For nearly an hour, William and Elizabeth presented the Foundation's accounts in detail, explaining each source of funding and each expense. Emily watched, admiring the clarity and honesty with which they faced the sometimes aggressive questions from the journalists. Then a question caught everyone off guard. "Mr. Thompson," a journalist stood up, his tone accusatory, "we have information that a former employee of your old company claims to have evidence that you continued unethical practices even after the initial scandal. How do you respond to these allegations?" A heavy silence fell over the room. Emily felt her stomach sink, watching the color drain from William's face. Elizabeth, beside him, seemed equally shocked. William hesitated for a moment before responding, his voice slightly trembling. "And I have no knowledge of such allegations. Our foundation operates with complete transparency and ethics. If there are specific accusations, we are open to investigating them fully." The press conference ended in a palpable atmosphere of tension. As soon as the cameras were turned off, William, Elizabeth, and Emily quickly retreated to the office, closely followed by Sophia and the Foundation's legal team. "What the hell was that?" Elizabeth exploded as soon as the door closed. "William, do you have something to tell us?" William slumped into a chair, suddenly looking aged and exhausted. I don't know what they're talking about. I swear since we started the Foundation, everything has been completely above board." Emily watched the scene unfold, torn between her loyalty to the Thompsons and a growing sense of unease. "Maybe it's just a misunderstanding," she suggested, hesitantly. "A disgruntled employee trying to cause trouble?" Sophia, who had been silent until then, spoke up. "Regardless of the source, we need to take this seriously. If there's any truth to these allegations, we need to uncover it and deal with it immediately. The following hours were a whirlwind of emergency meetings, calls to lawyers, and frantic attempts to trace the source of the accusations. Emily found herself in the middle of it all, helping to review documents and trying to stay calm amidst the chaos. It was late in the afternoon, when everyone was exhausted and on the brink of despair, that the truth finally came to light. An anonymous email arrived containing documents that seemed to implicate not William, but Elizabeth in some questionable transactions during the Foundation's early months. The silence that followed the revelation was deafening. All eyes turned to Elizabeth, who seemed to have shrunk in her chair. "Elizabeth?" William's voice was a mix of confusion and pain. "What is this?" Elizabeth closed her eyes, taking a deep breath before speaking. I did what I thought was necessary to ensure the Foundation had a solid start. There were some financial shortcuts I took. Nothing illegal, but certainly questionable from an ethical standpoint. Emily felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. Everything she believed in, all the work they had done, suddenly seemed tainted. "Why?" was all she could manage to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. Elizabeth looked directly at Emily, her eyes filled with a mix of regret and determination. "Because I believed in what we were doing. Because I couldn't bear the thought of failing, of disappointing all the people who depended on us. I thought I was protecting the dream we built together." The silence that followed was heavy, laden with conflicting emotions. William seemed devastated, Sophia was shocked, and Emily didn't know what to feel. It was William who finally broke the silence. "We need to fix this," he said, his voice tired but resolute. "We need to be completely transparent, face the consequences head-on." Emily nodded slowly, feeling the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. "What about the Foundation? The people who depend on us?" Elizabeth stood up, her face a mask of determination, despite the unshed tears in her eyes. "We'll do whatever it takes to protect the Foundation's work, even if I have to step aside." Elizabeth's words hung in the air, heavy with implications. Emily looked around the room, at the people who had become her family, and realized they were on the brink of another major change. As night fell over the Thompson mansion, Emily knew the coming days would be crucial. They would face not only public scrutiny and potential legal repercussions, but also the difficult task of rebuilding trust among themselves. What did the future hold for the Thompson Foundation and the people who had built it with so much love and dedication? Only time would tell, but one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. Emily looked out the window at the garden now shrouded in shadows and made a silent promise to herself and to all those the Foundation helped. She wouldn't give up. No matter how difficult the road ahead, she would fight to preserve the good they had done and to right the wrongs of the past. The days following Elizabeth's revelation were a whirlwind of emotions and frantic activity. The Thompson mansion, once a haven of hope and healing, now seemed enveloped in a cloud of uncertainty and tension. Emily found herself at the epicenter of a storm of crisis meetings, lawyer interviews, and endless document review sessions. Her days became a confusing mix of trying to keep the Foundation running while dealing with mounting external pressure and an atmosphere of internal distrust. One morning, about a week after the disastrous press conference, Emily found William alone in the therapeutic garden. He was sitting on a bench, watching the sunrise with a distant look in his eyes. She hesitated for a moment before approaching. "Mr. Thompson?" she called softly. "Are you okay?" William turned to her, a sad smile playing on his lips. "Ah, Emily. Good morning. I was just reflecting." Emily sat down beside him, feeling the weight of the silence between them. Finally, William spoke. "You know, when I started this foundation, I thought I was redeeming myself for my past mistakes. But now I wonder if I'm just perpetuating a cycle of errors and half-truths." Emily felt her heart tighten as she saw the pain in William's eyes. "Mr. Thompson, the good we've done here is real. The patients we've helped, the lives we've changed, that can't be denied." William nodded slowly. You're right, of course. But at what cost, Emily? At what cost? Before Emily could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of Elizabeth. Her usually composed face showed clear signs of sleepless nights and constant worry. "Ah, here you are," said Elizabeth, her voice tense. "We have a meeting with the legal team in half an hour. They have news." The trio walked in silence back to the mansion, each lost in their own thoughts. As they entered the meeting room, they were greeted by Sophia and a group of stern-faced lawyers. "Good morning, everyone," began the lead attorney, Dr. Mendez. "We've carefully analyzed the situation, and while Mrs. Thompson's actions were not strictly illegal, they certainly raised significant ethical questions." Elizabeth lowered her head, guilt evident in her posture. William instinctively reached for her hand, a gesture of solidarity despite everything. Dr. Mendez continued, "Our recommendation is a full and voluntary disclosure of all questionable transactions, followed by a significant restructuring of the Foundation's administration." "Restructuring?" Emily couldn't help but interrupt. "What exactly does that mean?" The lawyer looked directly at Elizabeth before responding. "It means that Mrs. Thompson must temporarily step away from any leadership position within the Foundation. Additionally, we suggest the creation of an independent oversight board to ensure full transparency moving forward." A heavy silence fell over the room. Emily looked at William and Elizabeth, seeing the shock and pain on their faces. It was Sophia, who finally broke the silence. "What about the patients, the ongoing programs?" Dr. Mendez adjusted his glasses before answering, "With the appropriate measures, we believe the Foundation can continue its operations. However, there will be a period of intense scrutiny and possible temporary funding reduction." The following hours were an emotional roller coaster of difficult decisions. Elizabeth, with tears in her eyes but determination in her voice, agreed to step aside. William, visibly shaken, committed to leading the restructuring process. Emily, observing all of this, felt torn between her loyalty to the Thompsons and her commitment to the Foundation's mission. When everyone else had left, she remained in the meeting room, gazing out the window at the garden they had built together. "A penny for your thoughts?" Sophia's gentle voice pulled her from her reverie. Emily turned, a weary smile on her face. "I'm just trying to process everything. It feels like in the blink of an eye, all our hard work is at risk." Sophia stepped closer, placing a comforting hand on Emily's shoulder. "It's not at risk, Emily. It's being tested, and you know what? I believe we'll come out stronger from this." Emily looked at Sophia, surprised by her optimism. "How can you be so sure?" "Because we have you," Sophia replied simply. "You, Emily, are the heart of this foundation. Your integrity, your compassion, these are the qualities that will guide us through this storm." Sophia's words touched Emily deeply. She felt a wave of determination rising within her. "You're right," she said, straightening her shoulders. "We can't give up now. There are too many people counting on us." In the days and weeks that followed, Emily found herself stepping into a leadership role she had never imagined. With Elizabeth stepping back and William focused on handling the legal and public ramifications of the situation, it fell to Emily to keep the Foundation's programs running. She threw herself into the work with renewed dedication, spending long hours at hospitals and rehabilitation centers, ensuring that every patient continued to receive the care they needed. Her evenings were filled with planning meetings and brainstorming, sessions to find ways to do more with fewer resources. One day, while visiting one of the rehabilitation centers, Emily had an encounter that would change her perspective. A young patient, Lucy, who had made remarkable progress in recovering from a stroke, approached her. "Miss Emily," Lucy called, her voice still a bit hesitant due to aphasia. "I heard about the Foundation's troubles. I want you to know what you've done for me, for all of us here. It's real, it matters." Emily felt tears forming in her eyes. "Thank you, Lucy. You don't know how much I needed to hear that." In that moment, looking into Lucy's hopeful face, Emily felt a renewal of her purpose. Yes, mistakes had been made. Yes, the road ahead would be difficult, but the good they were doing was undeniable and worth fighting for. As she returned to the mansion that night, Emily made a silent promise to herself and to all the patients like Lucy. She would do whatever it took to ensure that the Thompson Foundation not only survived this crisis, but emerged from it stronger and more dedicated than ever to its mission of healing and hope. The future was still uncertain, but Emily knew that with determination, integrity, and the support of those who believed in the Foundation's mission, they could overcome any obstacle. The journey of redemption and rebuilding was just beginning, and Emily was ready to lead the way. The months that followed were a roller coaster of emotions and challenges for Emily and the entire Thompson Foundation team. The restructuring proposed by the lawyers was in full swing, bringing significant changes to how the foundation operated. Elizabeth, true to her word, had completely stepped back from day-to-day operations, though her presence was still felt in the halls of the mansion. William, for his part, divided his time between cooperating with ongoing investigations and working tirelessly to keep the Foundation's funders and partners on board. Emily found herself in a leadership position she had never imagined. As the person most familiar with the Foundation's programs and patients, she became the vital link between the changing administration and the hands-on work that continued in the hospitals and rehabilitation centers. One sunny summer morning, Emily was in her new office, formerly a rarely used living room in the mansion, reviewing reports when Sophia walked in, carrying a stack of documents. "Good morning, Emily," Sophia greeted with a tired but genuine smile. "How are we today?" Emily sighed, rubbing her tired eyes. "Surviving, I think. The numbers from the last quarter are encouraging, all things considered, but we still have a long way to go." Sophia nodded, sitting down across from Emily's desk. "Well, I have some news that might help. The new oversight board is finally formed, and they want to meet with you this afternoon." Emily felt a wave of nervousness. The independent oversight board was one of the key recommendations from the lawyers to ensure the transparency and integrity of the Foundation moving forward. Their approval would be crucial for the organization's future. "With me? But what about William?" Emily asked, surprised. Sophia smiled gently. "William suggested that you be the Foundation's spokesperson for this meeting. He believes, and I agree, that you are the one who best represents the true spirit of our work." Emily was speechless for a moment, feeling the weight of the trust placed in her. I don't know what to say. It's a big responsibility." "A responsibility you are more than ready to take on," Sophia assured, gently squeezing Emily's hand. "Now shall we go over the key points for the meeting?" The next few hours were a whirlwind of preparation. Emily dove into reports, statistics, and patient stories, determined to present the best possible case for the continuation and expansion of the Foundation's work. When the time for the meeting finally arrived, Emily found herself facing a diverse group of professionals: renowned doctors, ethics experts, non-profit administrators. Their gazes were attentive and, in some cases, skeptical. Taking a deep breath, Emily began her presentation. She spoke not just with numbers and charts, but with heart. She shared stories of patients like Lucy, described the research breakthroughs the Foundation had enabled, and detailed plans for the future. "Ladies and gentlemen," she concluded, her voice steady despite her nerves, "I know the Thompson Foundation has faced significant challenges. Mistakes were made, and we are committed to correcting them. But the good we do, the lives we transform, that is real and valuable. With your guidance and oversight, I believe we can not only continue this work, but expand and improve it." There was a moment of silence after she finished. Then, to her surprise, the board's chairman, Dr. Oliver, a respected neurologist, began to applaud. The other members soon joined in. "Miss Carter," Dr. Oliver said, a genuine smile on his face, "your passion and dedication are evident, and more importantly, your integrity is clear. I believe I speak for everyone when I say we are eager to work with you and the Foundation's team to ensure this vital work continues and thrives." Emily felt a wave of relief and gratitude wash over her. It was a crucial step in the right direction. Leaving the meeting, she found William waiting in the hallway, anxiety evident on his face. "So?" he asked, barely containing his apprehension. Emily couldn't hold back a smile. "They're on board. We have work ahead of us, but they believe in us, Mr. Thompson. They believe in what we're doing." William let out a sigh of relief, pulling Emily into an unexpected hug. "I knew you could do it, Emily. You are the heart of this foundation now." As they walked back to the office, eagerly discussing the next steps, they were interrupted by Elizabeth, who was hurrying down the hallway with a look of concern on her face. "William, Emily," she called, her voice tense. "We need to talk. It's about Leo." Emily felt her heart tighten. Leo, the cat who had played such a crucial role in William's recovery, had become something of an unofficial mascot for the foundation, often visiting patients and bringing comfort. "What happened?" William asked, the worry evident in his voice. Elizabeth hesitated for a moment before responding. "He's sick, very sick. The vet doesn't have good news." The shock of the news hit Emily like a punch to the gut. Leo wasn't just a pet. He symbolized the beginning of their entire journey, the catalyst that had triggered William's recovery and, by extension, the creation of the foundation. As they hurried to the veterinary clinic, Emily couldn't help but reflect on how, even in moments of progress and hope, life had a way of reminding us of our fragility. What did the future hold for Leo? And how would this new trial affect the already fragile emotional recovery of the Thompsons and the foundation? Emily knew that the days ahead would bring new challenges, both personal and professional. But she was determined to face them, one step at a time, with the same courage and compassion that had guided her this far. The veterinary clinic was a familiar place for Emily, having accompanied Leo on his routine visits over the years. But that day, the sterile environment and the smell of antiseptic felt oppressive. William, Elizabeth, and Emily waited in tense silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Dr. Sanders, the vet who had cared for Leo for years, entered the waiting room with a grave expression. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, Miss Carter," he greeted, his voice soft but serious. "I'm afraid the news isn't good." William squeezed Elizabeth's hand, his voice trembling as he asked, "How bad is it, doctor?" The vet sighed deeply before responding. "Leo has an aggressive tumor in his liver. Given his advanced age and the stage of the disease, treatment options are limited." Emily felt as if the air had been sucked out of the room. Leo wasn't just a pet. He was a symbol of hope, a living reminder of the miracle of William's recovery. Elizabeth was the first to break the silence, her voice choked with emotion. How long does he have?" "It's hard to say for sure," Dr. Sanders replied gently. "It could be weeks, maybe a few months. The important thing now is to ensure he's comfortable and pain-free." William nodded slowly, unshed tears glistening in his eyes. "Can we see him?" The vet led them to a private room where Leo rested on a soft bed. The once vibrant and energetic Siamese cat now looked frail and tired. Still, upon seeing William, he lifted his head and let out a soft meow. Emily watched with a heavy heart as William knelt beside the bed, gently stroking Leo's fur. "Hey, buddy," he murmured, his voice choked. "You've been so strong for so long. Now it's our turn to be strong for you." In the days that followed, the routine at the Thompson mansion and the foundation subtly shifted to accommodate Leo's care. Emily, with her experience in palliative care, took an active role in ensuring the feline's comfort. One afternoon, while administering Leo's medication, Emily found William sitting quietly in the garden, watching the sunset. "Mr. Thompson," she called softly, "are you okay?" William turned to her, a sad smile on his lips. "Ah, Emily, I was just reflecting. You know, it was right here that Leo woke me up for the first time after the accident. A simple touch of his paw and, well, you know the rest of the story." Emily nodded, sitting down beside him. "He really changed everything, didn't he?" "More than you can imagine," William replied, his gaze distant. "Leo didn't just bring me back to consciousness. He reminded me of what's truly important in life: love, connection, compassion. All the things I had neglected in my blind pursuit of success and recognition." Emily felt a wave of emotion as she listened to William's words. "It's amazing how sometimes the simplest creatures teach us the deepest lessons." William nodded, turning to face her directly. "Emily, I want you to know, no matter what happens to Leo, the work we've started here, the good we're doing, it will continue. It's his legacy as much as it is ours." In the days that followed, the Thompson mansion became a sanctuary of care and compassion. Patients from the foundation, upon hearing about Leo's condition, began sending cards and drawings. Some even made brief visits, sharing stories of how the cat had touched their lives during their own recoveries. Elizabeth, who had always maintained a certain emotional distance, surprised everyone with her dedication to Leo. She spent hours by his side, reading aloud or simply offering silent comfort. One evening, Emily found Elizabeth asleep beside Leo's bed, her hand gently resting on the cat's fur. The scene deeply moved Emily, reminding her of how love and compassion can flourish even in the most difficult circumstances. As the days had turned into weeks, it became clear that Leo's time was running out. His energy gradually waned, though his spirit remained strong. It was on a quiet Sunday morning that Leo finally closed his eyes for the last time, surrounded by William, Elizabeth, and Emily. The moment, though painful, was serene, a peaceful farewell to a beloved companion who had touched so many lives. In the days that followed, Emily observed how the loss of Leo deeply affected not only the Thompson family, but the entire foundation community. Patients, staff, and volunteers came together in a wave of support and shared memories. At an intimate ceremony in the mansion's garden, William announced the creation of a new foundation program, the Leo Project, dedicated to training therapy, animals to assist in the recovery of patients with neurological injuries. Leo showed us the healing power of unconditional love, William said, his voice emotional but firm. Through this program, his spirit will continue to touch and transform lives. Emily, listening to the announcement, felt a mix of sadness and hope. The loss of Leo was painful, but the impact he had and would continue to have was undeniable. As the sun set that day, casting a golden light over the garden, Emily reflected on the lessons Leo had taught them all. About resilience, about the power of a gentle touch, about how sometimes the greatest transformations begin with the simplest gestures. The future was still uncertain, with many challenges ahead for the foundation and everyone involved. But in that moment, watching William and Elizabeth holding hands, united in their grief and their determination to continue the work they had started, Emily felt a renewed sense of purpose. The journey that had begun with a simple Siamese cat had grown into something much larger, and though Leo was no longer physically present, his legacy of love, healing, and hope would continue to guide them in the days, months, and years to come. Emily knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together, stronger, more compassionate, and more determined than ever to make a difference in the world, one patient at a time. The months following Leo's passing were a time of profound transformation for the Thompson Foundation and everyone involved. The grief over the loss of the beloved feline gradually gave way to a renewed determination to honor his legacy through the Foundation's work. The Leo Project, announced by William during the memorial ceremony, quickly became the Foundation's flagship program. Emily, with her experience in caregiving and her personal connection to Leo's story, naturally took the lead in the program. On a sunny spring morning, about 6 months after the project's launch, Emily found herself at the Foundation's new animal training center. The space, once an underutilized area of the Thompson estate, now buzzed with the energy of dogs, cats, and even some exotic animals in training for assisted therapy. It's incredible how much has changed, isn't it? Sophia's voice surprised Emily, who was observing a training session with a young Labrador. Emily turned, a genuine smile lighting up her face. It really is. Sometimes I still catch myself being amazed at how much we've accomplished in such a short time. Sophia nodded, her gaze sweeping across the bustling space. You know, when William first suggested this project, I'll admit I had my doubts. But seeing the impact it's having, it's truly extraordinary. The two women walked together through the center, occasionally stopping to observe the various activities underway. There were socialization sessions for puppies, advanced training for older dogs, and even a small group of cats being introduced to medical equipment to familiarize them with hospital environments. "How is William?" Emily asked, noting the founder's absence in recent weeks. Sophia's expression grew more serious. He's adjusting. The loss of Leo hit him hard, you know. But this project, seeing the good it's doing, has been a source of comfort and purpose for him. Emily nodded understandingly. She herself had gone through difficult times after Leo's passing, questioning her role and purpose. But the work, the tangible impact they were having on people's lives, had anchored her. As they continued their walk, they were interrupted by a commotion near the center's entrance. A group of people was arriving, led by none other than Elizabeth Thompson. "Elizabeth!" Emily exclaimed, surprised. Since stepping back from her duties at the foundation, Elizabeth had kept a low profile, rarely appearing at public events. Elizabeth approached, a cautious smile on her face. Beside her, to Emily's surprise, was Dr. Oliver, the chairman of the Oversight Board. "Good morning, Emily, Sophia," Elizabeth greeted. "I hope we're not interrupting anything." Emily quickly composed herself. "Not at all. It's a pleasure to see you here, Mrs. Thompson. Dr. Oliver, welcome to our training center." Dr. Oliver smiled warmly. "It's impressive what you've managed to accomplish here in such a short time, Miss Carter. In fact, that's exactly what we've come to discuss." The group moved to an improvised meeting room where Elizabeth and Dr. Oliver explained the purpose of their visit. The Oversight Board, after months of careful observation and evaluation, was not only satisfied with the Foundation's progress, but excited about future possibilities. The Leo project has caught the attention of several research institutions and hospitals across the country, Dr. Oliver explained. They're interested in partnerships in expanding the program to their own facilities. Emily felt a wave of emotion wash over her. External recognition of the work they had been doing was a powerful validation of all their efforts. Elizabeth, who had remained relatively quiet until then, finally spoke. "Emily, the board. Well, we believe it's time to take the Thompson Foundation to the next level, and we'd like you to lead that expansion." The shock must have been evident on Emily's face as Sophia quickly placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. I don't know what to say," Emily stammered, suddenly overwhelmed by the magnitude of the proposal. Dr. Oliver smiled gently. "You don't have to answer now, Miss Carter. We know it's a big decision. But based on everything we've seen, and how you've steered not just this project, but the entire foundation through turbulent times, we believe you're the right person for this task." The following hours were a whirlwind of discussions, presentations of preliminary plans, and visions for the Foundation's future. Emily found herself alternating between moments of excitement at the possibilities and moments of doubt about her ability to lead such an ambitious endeavor. By the end of the day, when everyone else had left, Emily found herself back in the garden, on the same bench where so many crucial conversations had taken place over the years. The sun was setting, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, reminiscent of that first night when she had arrived at the Thompson mansion, a young nurse full of ideals and uncertainties. Thinking about the offer, William's voice surprised her. She hadn't seen him approach. Emily nodded, a hesitant smile on her lips. "It's an incredible opportunity, but also terrifying. I don't know if I'm ready for so much responsibility." William sat beside her, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "You know, Emily, when I started my company many years ago, I had the same doubts. I wondered if I was up to the challenge, if I could really make the difference I dreamed of." He paused, turning to face her directly. "But I learned something important over the years, something you helped me rediscover. It's not our certainties that define us, but how we face our uncertainties. And you, Emily, have faced every challenge with grace, compassion, and a strength you might not even realize you possess." William's words touched Emily deeply. She reflected on her journey. From that first day caring for a man in a vegetative state to now, being invited to lead a national expansion of a program she had helped create. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson," she said softly, "for everything. For trusting me from the start, for giving me the chance to grow and learn." William smiled, a paternal pride gleaming in his eyes. "No, Emily. I'm the one who should be thanking you. You not only brought me back to life, but gave my existence a new purpose. And now you're about to take that purpose to a level I could never have imagined." As the last ray of sunlight disappeared on the horizon, Emily felt a clarity she hadn't experienced in a long time. The path ahead would be challenging, full of unknown obstacles, but she wouldn't be alone. She had the Thompsons' trust, the support of a dedicated team, and most importantly, the inner strength she had discovered along her journey. "I think it's time we start planning the future, don't you?" Emily said, a determined smile on her face. William nodded, standing up and offering his hand to help her. "Yes, Emily, the future awaits us, and I can't wait to see what you'll do with it." Together they walked back to the mansion, ready to begin the next chapter of a story that had started with a simple act of care and now promised to touch countless lives across the country. Leo's legacy, the spirit of healing and hope he had inspired, was about to spread far beyond the walls of the Thompson mansion, and Emily, once a young nurse full of dreams, was now ready to lead the way. The following months were a whirlwind of activity for Emily and the entire Thompson Foundation team. The decision to expand the Leo project on a national scale brought with it a flood of new challenges and opportunities. Emily, now officially named the Director of Expansion for the Foundation, found herself constantly traveling, visiting hospitals, rehabilitation centers, and research institutions across the country. Each trip brought new perspectives and ideas, but also made her appreciate even more the home she had found at the Thompson mansion. One autumn afternoon, nearly a year after the expansion began, Emily returned from a particularly exhausting trip to Chicago. As she entered the mansion, she was greeted by an unusually bustling atmosphere. "Emily, so glad you're back," Sophia greeted her, a mix of excitement and concern in her voice. "We have an interesting situation on our hands." Intrigued, Emily followed Sophia to the main office where she found William, Elizabeth, and Dr. Oliver in an animated discussion. "Ah, Emily, welcome back," William greeted her, his face lit with an enthusiasm she hadn't seen in a long time. "We have some incredible news to share with you." Dr. Oliver cleared his throat, adopting a more formal tone. "Miss Carter, during your absence, we received an unusual proposal. A team of researchers from the Federal University of New York reached out to us. They are working on a revolutionary brain-machine interface project and believe that Project Leo could be the ideal partner for clinical trials." Emily felt her heart race. Brain-machine interface was a cutting-edge field, with the potential to completely transform the lives of patients with severe neurological injuries. "This is incredible," she managed to say, her mind already racing with possibilities. "But why did they specifically come to us?" Elizabeth, who had been silent until then, replied, "Apparently, our work with animal-assisted therapy caught their attention. They believe that combining advanced technology with the emotional and therapeutic element of animals could produce extraordinary results." Emily nodded slowly, absorbing the information. It was an exciting opportunity, but also a daunting one. Entering the field of cutting-edge research would mean navigating uncharted waters with new ethical and logistical challenges. "What do you all think about this?" she asked, looking around the room. William was the first to respond, his enthusiasm evident. "I believe it's a unique opportunity, Emily. Imagine the impact we could have if this works." Elizabeth, always the voice of caution, added, "It's exciting, no doubt, but also risky. We need to carefully consider all the implications before committing." Dr. Oliver nodded in agreement. "That's exactly why we wanted to discuss this with you, Miss Carter. Your practical experience and vision will be crucial in making this decision." Emily felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. This wasn't just a decision about the future of the Foundation, but potentially about the future of neurological injury treatment worldwide. "We need more information," she finally said. "I'd like to meet personally with the research team to better understand the project and how exactly we would fit into it." Everyone agreed with Emily's cautious approach. In the weeks that followed, the Thompson mansion became a hub of intense intellectual activity. Researchers, doctors, and ethics experts were invited for a series of lectures and workshops, all focused on exploring the possibilities and challenges of brain-machine interfaces. Emily absorbed every new piece of information eagerly, but also with a growing sense of responsibility. She often found herself in the garden, on the same bench where so many important decisions had been made, reflecting on the path that had brought them there. It was during one of these reflective moments that she was surprised by an unexpected visitor. A young researcher from the New York team, Dr. Nathan Carter, found her in the garden. "Miss Carter," he called hesitantly, "sorry to bother you, but I wanted the chance to speak with you personally." Emily invited him to sit, intrigued by the young scientist's direct approach. "You know," Dr. Carter began, a spark of passion in his eyes, "when I started this project, it was all about the technology for me. The idea of creating a perfect interface between the human brain and machines. It was fascinating." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the therapeutic garden. "But since we arrived here, since I saw the work you do with the animals, with the patients, I realized we were missing something crucial." Emily tilted her head, curious. "And what would that be?" "The human element," Dr. Carter replied, his eyes meeting hers. "The emotional connection, the comfort, the hope that your animals bring. That's something no machine can replicate. And now I believe it's exactly this combination, high-tech with a human touch, that can truly revolutionize the treatment of neurological injuries." The young researcher's words resonated deeply with Emily. She found herself transported back to the beginning of her journey, remembering how a simple Siamese cat had catalyzed William's recovery in a way no conventional medical treatment had. "Dr. Carter," she said, a smile forming on her lips, "I think you've just convinced me that this partnership is exactly what we need." In the weeks that followed, the Thompson Foundation and the New York research team worked tirelessly to develop a collaboration plan. The project, affectionately nicknamed the Leo Connection, promised to combine the best of brain-machine interface technology with proven animal-assisted therapy techniques. At an emotional ceremony attended by patients, families, researchers, and the press, William and Emily officially announced the launch of the project. "Today," William declared, his voice filled with emotion, "we are not just starting a new chapter. In the history of the Thompson Foundation, we are potentially opening a new frontier in the treatment of neurological injuries, and all of this began with a simple act of love and care." As applause echoed through the auditorium, Emily felt a wave of emotion wash over her. Looking at the hopeful faces of the patients and their families, at the pride in William and Elizabeth's eyes, and at the determination of the research team, she knew they were on the brink of something truly transformative. The path ahead would be challenging, filled with unknown obstacles and complex ethical questions, but Emily was ready to face it. With Leo's lesson in her heart, that sometimes the gentlest touch can trigger the deepest changes, she knew they were on the right path. As the sun set over the Thompson mansion, casting a golden glow over the therapeutic garden, Emily made a silent promise to herself and to all those who trusted her. No matter how advanced the technology became, she would never lose sight of the human element, the compassion and the care that were at the heart of everything they did. The months following the launch of the Leo Connection project were an emotional roller coaster for Emily and the entire Thompson Foundation team. The initial excitement gave way to a complex reality filled with technical, ethical, and logistical challenges. Emily found herself torn between her growing responsibilities at the Foundation and the need to quickly learn about cutting-edge neuroscience technologies. Her nights were filled with intense study, trying to grasp the intricate details of brain-machine interfaces. One morning, after a particularly long night of studying, Emily arrived at the office to find Sophia waiting for her, a worried expression on her face. "Emily, we have a problem," Sophia said bluntly. "One of the test patients is experiencing unexpected side effects." Emily's heart raced. "How serious?" "It's not life-threatening, but it's concerning," Sophia explained. "John, the patient with a spinal cord injury, is reporting intense phantom sensations and pain that weren't there before." Emily felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. This was exactly the kind of complication they had feared, but hoped to avoid. "Have we informed the research team?" she asked, already heading for the door. Sophia nodded. "Yes. Dr. Carter is on his way. William and Elizabeth have also been notified." The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Emily coordinated an emergency meeting with the medical team, the researchers, and John's family. The tension in the room was palpable, with everyone aware of the implications this complication could have for the project as a whole. Dr. Carter, the young and brilliant researcher who had convinced Emily of the project's feasibility, seemed particularly shaken. "I don't understand," he murmured, running his hands through his hair in frustration. "All the preliminary tests indicated this shouldn't happen." Emily placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Sometimes, Nathan, the human body surprises us. What's important now is that we find a solution." As the team discussed possible causes and solutions, Emily found herself reflecting on the unpredictable nature of their work. Each patient was unique, each interaction between technology and biology potentially uncharted territory. It was at this moment that Elizabeth, who had remained silent until then, spoke up. "What if—" She hesitated for a moment, as if weighing her words. "What if we reintroduced animal therapy at this stage?" All eyes turned to her, surprised.